Before I get started, hi everyone, my name is Elias. I'm a researcher at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences. I'm also the project leader for this project. Coming to the topic at hand, what is a service and for whom and what purposes? And this might seem like a quite basic question to pose, what is a service? But it's a quite fundamental question to address if you are thinking about developing or improving different services, to actually sort of focus on what are the characteristics of a service and what are sort of the possibilities and the limitation or the risks that you need to be aware of when you are developing or when you are performing services or selling services in different settings. So for that reason, it's important to also then reflect on the specific characteristics and the abilities of different services. What are they set out to cater to? What purposes are they focusing on, and so on? Which then also then comes to us, and as a service is focused often on an additional activity or support for individuals to perform specific activities, for instance, then to manage a forest. Different types of services is then needed to support that type of everyday activity or goal that different people set out to make everyday life a bit easier. And then that brings us to sort of the sub question of this topic is sort of for whom and for what purposes. Then becomes crucial also to understand the service itself, but also what types of activities that service contributes to. But this also reflection also comes down to trying to move beyond the sort of the traditional ways of doing things, to actually reflect the way of the everyday life of doing things, and also reflect upon why are we doing these things, how are we doing them, and what are the implications of the way that we are doing it. But to summarize, a service is in general then what sets us aside from a goods is that it is a process. It's a series of different activities that connects to each other's in difference then to goods, which are more focused on physical objects and selling those through different processes. The other different thing is that within services that these are produced and consumed partly at the same time. That there is no clear distinction between when a service is being produced and when it's consumed, and that there is a strong overlap, which then also sets us apart from a goods productions, where you, for instance, have an industry that produce a specific set of goods that then later can be stored and available for consumption at a later time, which also then contributes to that the process of producing services and offering services becomes more complex as these different areas are interconnecting, which then also adds that a service for that purpose cannot be stockpiled. You can't really store them and wait for consumption. That consumptions need to come at the same time as the production of the service itself. And when we then, the other differentiating factor is, of course, the consumer and how the consumer is being perceived within this type of setting. And within a service setting, a consumer is mainly seen as a co-producer or participant of value production within the service process. So it's not only a sort of a passive receiver of a service. Although of course there's different degrees of that level of participation, but there still is this kind of basic interactive part about it. Which then also comes down to that sort of the outcome and the results of a service process to high degree is dependent on the process, the situation, and the relations around the service offering. So the service is by itself not objective or clean. It's also a part of these type of relations and setting, which also then contributes to that services are not homogeneous in the sense that it's standardized ways of doing a service or performing a service, that each service production or service process differs, sometimes very much and sometimes very little. But there are still varieties within how a service being produced, depending on how the process, the situation, and the relations between the people involved in the service productions takes place. So with that being said, a service is to a very large extent a relational product that depends very much on the relations that take place within this service process and how that is carried out. And as I said before, there are no standard ways, which also makes of a service, which also makes it hard to actually measure the quality of a service, given that there is this kind of variations between different settings and different relationships. And an additional complexity and uncertainty in relation to service production and delivery is, of course, the social and cultural situation, or how it is actually embedded within those kind of structures of norms and perspectives, which also then forms the outcome of a service, and also how it's being interpreted by both the service provider and also the consumer. What types of word and what types of meaning is sort of within this kind of wider context of a social and cultural context. And this kind of social interaction also then makes it hard for the consumer difficult to isolate the service quality from the quality of the service provider itself, and those which gives that those kind of interaction is and interlinkages are quite strong, and for that reason it's in some situation also maybe hard and also maybe not positive or productive to actually only focus on the service quality itself without actually also bringing in the service provider and the people, sort of the personnel that provides the service. And these kind of services can also then very much be understood through the service owners or the consumers that understand and consume these products. For instance, if we take the distant forest owners, which we have seen is providing another sets of social setting and norms related to forestry, given that they're not part of the sort of the traditional sphere. And this process approach to services also, and a relational aspect also to a high degree, also highlights that marketing is not something separate that takes place within a specific department of the organization or the company, but also is an integrated part of the service provision itself, and should also be catered in that way in order to also be able to manage expectations, but also in the end the outcomes and the sort of the end experiences of the service provider and the consumer itself. And then it comes down, of course, also to what needs is it that is addressed through this type of service. And as I said before, participation is a very crucial aspect of service provision, and also raising awareness of what types of need that needs to be catered upon, where we both have this role where the consumer has both the role as a consumer, but also is a resource within that sense within the process. And the relationships is therefore a source of both a source of knowledge and value, both in terms of long-term business contact, that the relationship depends on knowledge of the consumer's process and needs, but also this mutual goals of value creation, that there is this need for a win-win situation or a balance within these relation and the service provisions of what type of value that is being created, for whom and for what purposes, and so on. Which then brings us on then to the values itself, that they are being created together, and that the value proposition from, for instance, the salesperson needs to be matched by the consumer, that there is a balance between this. And for that purpose, the relationship and trust is a crucial part about service provision, also being able then to manage both potential risk if there is not a positive outcome, or if there is any problems with the service provisions, but also being able to manage these types of bumps within the process, and also sort of sustaining trust through the process, and also being able to incorporate the values of the customer in this process. And the value of a service is therefore a support for the customer's process and value creation. The customer value creation enables the service provider to generate values from the relationship. And it's a process where consumers and companies' resources cooperate. So there is a dependency, as I said before, within this process, where both parts is needed for a positive outcome. And to summarize this, you can roughly divide this type of characteristics into two parts, where we have the goods versus the services here as a summary, and where I've given some examples of services that are what you can call highly services, and services that have a partly crossover, where we have, for instance, the fuel and transportations versus the advisory or potentially enforced plans. And the difference there is that we have the tangible and intangible aspects, characteristics of a service. Within goods, there's a low consumer involvement, given this sort of separation between consumption and production, while there is a high consumer involvement within services. There's a low quality control problem, as we talked before, while there is a high quality control problem in the service side, given the sort of diversity, which also then comes down to that it's easy versus it is hard to evaluate it, depending on different relations and different factors that takes part in this process. The possibilities of having inventories or not, and also this kind of time criteria, whether and how hard that is, given the sort of distinguish between consumption and production, where there is in service a much more in time concept or need in relation to the service provision. And then there is a low importance of contact within goods, while there, as for relational aspect, is a high importance of concept within services. So with that sort of brief introduction to what is a service, I would like to thank for your attention.